Hello, welcome to this week's edition of the Turning Points podcast. Today was a doozy for both of us. We kind of got blasted by this extreme openness and acceptance from the great and powerful Alaya. She had an incredibly detailed and very specific recollection of her story and just incredible embodiment of the wisdom that, thank God, exists in this beingness.
Yeah, it was an awesome conversation. I hope you go ahead and listen. Alaya lives in North Carolina with her husband and 2 children, and she's been teaching a satsang online since 2011. So I will put that information in there. And I met Alaya through the Wellbeing Center, through Dawn and Patty and Colleen, who highly recommended her. And of course, she's had similar teachers. She's one of her teachers is Adi Shanti, but she just goes and explains her story really from beginning, from when she was 3 years old to now when she started teaching. And it just was a heart expanding, beautiful story that slayed both Sean and I. So enjoy. Hello and welcome to our podcast, Alaya.
Hello. Yes.
Thank you so much for joining us. This is
glad to be here.
Yeah, I was a little nervous, but before, like I started thinking about it last night, and I was a little nervous because this will be the very first podcast that we've done where I actually don't know. Sean has had several people, but I don't know personally, and so I am so excited to hear more about your journey. And I've certainly researched it, and you were, of course, recommended Dawn and Patty and Colleen. So thank you for agreeing to do this without knowing us.
Pleasure.
All right. So the first question we start off with is, many seekers can recall that point in time when they started to, question their so-called reality or what they were taught, their childhood beliefs. So do you recall when you became a seeker?
I'll start my journey early on, and I would not, we'll see where it sounds like the seeker starts, because I'm not, we'll just kind of feel into it and see how it feels. My first, I had a memory as I was growing up that would come back to me over and over again. And it was from when I was about 3 years old. It was an afternoon nap. And I woke up from this nap and all the colors were really bright. And there was a sense of, before that, everything was very black and white feeling, or dusty, or without aliveness. But the aliveness was, and the colors were so bright, and there was this sense of, when it came back to me as I got older, the consciousness was the same, whatever age. There was I couldn't have any words or thought for it when I was younger, but I was able to have a greater understanding when I was older, that there was just a very deep awareness that was available there. And I also recognized later in life that there was something that changed after that. And my words for it, or how I would think about it, evolved. But what I would describe as I was younger and getting into my teens was, I was a person that felt like I had a lot of common sense. And later I would describe that as, there was a connectedness that I had with this that was prioritized over everything else. So I grew up in also people would say I'm maybe the black sheep of the family. I think this connectedness, really, I wouldn't use this language then, but later now I like to use it now, was I grew up sort of in a nete, kind of, so the family construction and culturally where I lived and everything else there, and the church that I went to, I felt like there was a lot of what went into my mind was this didn't reflect what was here. It was like, no, not this, not this, not this. And I was thinking back on it, there were very specific ones that were this. So when it came around like religion, I remember very specifically, there was one particular day where, I grew up going to church, going to Bible school, but there was one particular day where I really, like the stories that they were telling, it really hit me. I was just like, this feels just like these just feel like stories. They feel like the Hansel and Gretel stories, or I couldn't differentiate between folklore stories and these Christian stories. Like they had no aliveness in it. And I really, at that time, that really seemed to be a very high value for me. And I really left religion and became very uninterested. And I think there was a belief there that took on a little bit of a bigger picture, like all religions, everything kind of blanketed at the time, but I didn't have really much exposure to other things. But that's an example of just, maybe my parents' ideals, religion, even lots of things that I learned in school. I knew I was learning them, but I didn't really, inside, a lot of it felt very fishy. And so as I was growing older, there were some yeses. There was one woman who was my mom's best friend. She's like the best friend that you call an aunt, right? That's not really an aunt, but and she would take care of us when my parents would travel. Not all the time, but it was really special when she did. But her being was like this, when she came in, it was just like all light. And my insides, it was like everything had been kind of not light. And then when she come in, there was light. And there was everything, what came out of her mouth or what I experienced from her was now what the words I would say is unconditional, unconditioned and loved. And the words would be resonating with that, like I can tell, she would say things, I can tell you really know what's going on. Or she'd say, your heart is so good. Or she would reflect back, and I would just devour this energy. And inside I was like, this. And there was another person when I was in high school that I was going through. It really became super painful by the time I was in high school. I was really confused. Nothing felt right. Nothing looked right. And it was in almost all the arenas in my life. And it wasn't like things were terrible, but it definitely felt like a lot of the stories and the situations I was in were not aligning with like the insides. And this one counselor, I was crying in class that just like said, asked the teacher to let him come to, the slip to come to the office. And we proceeded to have a friendship for the 3 years I was in high school. Mm-hmm. And he was like a yes. He sat down and I would tell him this is the first time probably I started communicating about what felt like was very traumatizing for me. And he was saying, he was like, you're really connected to yourself. You really, he was really reflecting love and beauty and the words of that I wasn't crazy, and that the way I was seeing the world and the way I was feeling, that, it's like this, but it says, this feels like it should be like this, and the way I was describing was a yearning for light and love and openness, and the unconditional really was what my yearning was asking for. So I could talk more about, my youth, but I think I'll just move on up to college, if that's okay. I'm just giving you a nice little, yeah. So when college hit, there was some confusion in there too, and it was I was very quiet as a kid, and so I was moving through a lot of like ordinary stuff that kids go through. I moved through things pretty quickly though, so I found that I was not necessarily a repeat offender. So as a lot. So I was having like a lot of problematic conditioning arising, but what was happening was I was in a lot of pain if I would hurt someone, or if the things that I had learned were problematic. And so there's quite a bit of like unwinding those first 2 years, a lot of pain and a lot of correction, of clearing out some really some things that were running that I wasn't really conscious of until that time, but also were really shifted to. And about that time, this is funny, it is another highlight one. So I watched the movie Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory.
That's pretty mystical.
Yeah, I just always felt that was such a mystical movie.
Yeah.
And so there was he's always like talking, Willy Wonka's always saying these like things, right? That are like, so there was this one that I could never hear it. I could never remember it the way it was actually being said. It was like in my being, the words would get changed over, but the words were, you are the dream maker and you are the dreamer of the dream. And it just like hit me, like, and it would keep coming back. It came back over the years, but it was just sort of this, a curiosity came from it. I didn't really understand what the words meant and why they kept coming back up, but I had such a curiosity why that was happening. It was it was a time where I also started hearing more of those kind of hearing instead of just feeling it. I started hearing more of the words inside of me. And so this "we are the dream makers, we are the dreamers in the dream" really sparked a lot of curiosity for me and confusion, and kept coming up. And then my 20s also were very ordinary. I did a lot of, I did the normal stuff of getting a job and learning how to pay for things. And I learned, what I mean? Right. Like I did a lot of that kind of growth, and it seemed pretty quiet. I was not into spiritual stuff. I was not thinking about spiritual things. I waited tables and I bartended and I had boyfriends, all that kind of stuff. And I socially kind of really, I guess I really enjoyed myself.
Oh, come on. We want to hear the dirt too. The details. Make people realize you're human also.
Right. Well, So, okay, this is a detail. So I ended up.
Okay.
I'll be honest with you.
Thank you.
So the night, but it really was pretty ordinary. And then I got very, used to go by LA, which is my birth name is Leslie Ann. And I started going by LA in college. I was a very socialite girl. And I modeled a lot during that time, off and on. And so it was just a fun social time in my life. It was not anything spiritual happening too much. So let me get back on track. So I started bartending at this place. It's called Dottie's. It was a little double wide trailer in Cabbagetown in Atlanta. I don't think it's there any longer. And I ended up bartending for this place. And if you were there, you would know it was a really special place. But at that time, it was sort of the height of my socialization and like my time there in Atlanta. And so I was at this amazing bar. It had like indigo girls that would come in. We had the Ku Klux Klan dragon, you know, I mean, it was very diverse. And everybody was sitting at you'd have like a lesbian couple, and you'd have like a punk rock band in the back. And there was a particular night or particular late afternoon before everything started where I had all these different people at my bar, all these people communing together. They didn't like each other, but they were tolerating. They were having a beer beside of each other. Sometimes they would like laugh at each other and share a joke. And I felt like I had hit a pentacle, that I had had a really, really great time. And that this was really, I couldn't imagine it getting any better. That it was like Alice in Wonderland, but everybody was here in a way that they weren't killing each other. And something clicked right then. And I also felt this downward spiral of these folks also, this is amazing, but nobody here knows me. Nobody knows me. Nobody loves me. Like, I can leave this, I can quit this job and walk out. And, you know, this whole thing had this very shimmering, dissolving kind of quality to it. And then I started hearing something very different, very quickly started coming in. And it was, okay, now it's time for you to get to work. Sort of like, it was like, I had this recognition of, oh, I'm supposed to do something different. And this is really fun, but it's time for me to get to work. And so I could feel it, and then I could hear myself saying it. And then there was like dramatic changes that happened after that. I left the job. I started having all kinds of things that were showing up that I had to do. So I stopped drinking. I stopped kind of the whole party lifestyle. I started shifting more towards reading. I was reading like Celestine Prophecy and Conversations with God with Neil Donald Walsh. Those are kind of the things that maybe the seeker started happening. And I was responding to things that were happening in my life. Like, I met someone who was on this diet called the Body Ecology Diet by Donna Gates, who had founded that in Atlanta. And it was kind of a big scene then, but it was like an autoimmune diet that did food combining. I was never, ever, I was the worst prior to that. But it really felt like I was going to do this diet. And so I started doing this really no sugar food combining cleanse. I felt like I had to do it. And my energy started getting really, really clear, like coming out of like a fog. The sharpness was so dramatically different than what I had been functioning from. I had so much more energy. Everyone around me was getting on the diet because I was doing it, like my friends, my parents, you know, it was just like, it was affecting everybody around them, because I think I was going through such an energetic transformation. I went back to school. I thought I was going to go get my degree in transpersonal psychology. I had studied psychology and studio art in college. And it just hit me. I saw a book, and then I started reading. I applied to the Naropa Institute and finished up a class or two at Georgia State University. But all of this was just, it was so no confusion. It was just yes, yes, yes. I knew what I needed to be doing. And around that time too, it was another nap, just like the one when I was 3. It was in the afternoon, late afternoon. I went to take a nap at my boyfriend's house at the time. And when I woke up from the nap, it was I could recognize it was very similar from when I was 3. There was a continuum. It was like all time collapsed, and it was same. And I didn't know what was happening. I remember I wasn't in a spiritual community. I wasn't really, I tried to explain my boyfriend at the time. It was not resonating. So I was really just kind of in my own experience. But I think because I had that experience at 3, I wasn't afraid, right? There was like I did get afraid eventually. But it wasn't for the first maybe 3 or 4 days. And I was just, woke up from the nap, and I was the doorknob. I was the tree. I was the wind. And I no longer could separate myself. But I was still able to talk. I was still able to have conversations. It was so dismantled that I didn't even have there was no observer to like have a conversation about it. So it was just like it was just a wonder and a curiosity, and just walking around and everything. When I didn't know it then, but when later, and as everything deepened for me years and years later, I was able to really feel that everything just really woke up then. At about 4 days, I started having like this feeling of being scared coming in, and that I wanted to go back to what I knew. And I was sitting on my front porch at the time in Cabbagetown. I remember sitting on the swing in the front of the house, and I had this kind of vision, like not Alice in Wonderland, but like Dorothy in her red slippers, that says, I want to go home. Mm-hmm. And I started, but the home was the small home, right? The small home. But I just remember sitting on that porch and just willing myself back into the box. And it was excruciating, really. It was painful. I was pushing myself back in a box, and it was not easy. It almost felt like I was giving myself surgery. So I never was the same again after that, though. There was such an opening that it was even more dramatic. I quit my job. I bought a truck. I had somebody build one of those little jalopies that you sleep on inside of it. I'd never camped in my life. Came from a well-off family. I'd never slept under the stars. I took a trip in the guise of, the Naropa Institute to go look at the school, but I ended up beelining it straight to where I had no idea, but I was in Sedona, Arizona, like probably, it was pretty fast. I don't know the timing, but maybe a month or something like that. And I did end up going up to Naropa and checking it out. But I knew when I got up there, all I could see was it was time for me to no longer be in school and to just jump off. But beforehand, when I went to Sedona and beelined it and then went up, when I went into Sedona, I knew I would be going back there. So it was a quick trip. I came back home, sold all my stuff. Everyone was pretty freaked out. My family was freaked out. My relationship was falling apart with the person I was with. I was leaving. I couldn't not leave. And so I sold stuff, put myself in my truck, and I drove back knowing I had met someone when I was in Sedona when I went through the first time, but I didn't go back with any connection to that person. So it was just a blind driving out by myself and sweating and vibrating, leaving the perimeter of Atlanta, which is where I was, and just also having to go. The fire in me and the energy of what I had to do was way over anything my brain could choose. It was just a direct. So when I got in Sedona, I immediately reconnected with that person. We ran into each other. They gave me a place to stay. And soon after that, I moved out into another little place that was close by. And this was a group of people. I did not know who Robert Adams was, but I don't know if you guys know who Robert Adams is. So he was a Papaji Ramana Maharshi of that lineage. And I didn't know them, but he was living there, and he had some students that were living there with him. He had just, when I had gotten there, he had just passed away. He had cancer, I believe, some form of cancer. And but they were still there. And that particular, like, I moved in, and almost immediately they just came to me. They were like, "We're going to see this teacher. Come with us." And I said, "Okay." And I get in there, and it's Neelam. So it's probably 100 people there. And I go and sit down, and then Neelam looks at me. And she's not even really looking at me. She's looking at everybody. But just that beam of just passing by and just talking and that transmission, it was everything from my 3-year-old all the way up into that moment, all came to a complete knowing that this is what I've been looking for. This, and it wasn't, and I recognized it wasn't even her. I recognized that she loved me unconditionally, that she did that without needing to know my name, without needing to ever meet me, and that it would always be the case. And so there was this absolute opening and recognition of the unconditioned. Now, everything that came out of her mouth was very disturbing to me, right? Everything.
As it should be from a teacher, right?
Yes. Everything I immediately was ready to, like, run away and give her the middle finger. I was like, because basically she was saying I was nobody, right? And so my ego was I was on fire in every kind of way. She had blown me open, but at the same time, I was this whole other, what was going on was just in a complete tantrum. So after that, I did not see her again for a while. And I was in Sedona for the rest of the year. And proceeded to go through a lot of this other part that was temper tantruming. There was a lot of reality teachings happening there. Really, you can find anything in Sedona, and I sure tasted it all. But I was really blessed that I am not a repeat offender, and I just moved through things nete, and really didn't. Nothing stuck, and it was becoming less and less for me to be interested in, to grab out. And at the same time, when I moved there, I was going by LA, right, all through this time. And when I moved to Sedona, I knew I didn't want to go by LA anymore. And I knew I didn't want to go by Leslie Ann, which is my birth name. And I felt like there was another name. The folks I was working for, they had a healing center there, and they asked me to do some PR work. I was going around to some of the hotels. This one particular hotel, the manager was walking me around, showing me the property. And I asked her name. Her name was Raining. And I thought, man, that's a cool name. Where did you get that name, Raining? And she proceeded to tell me the story. And her story, she said, my birth name was Lorraine. And I ended up going by Rain for a long time. And she said, and then it changed into Raining. And so right after this meeting, I went and took a hike out in one of the vortex areas there in Sedona. And that story kept coming up for me. I was sitting in this panoramic view, and I had this deck of cards that I used then. It wasn't the traditional tarot, but it was, it had like the system, the stuff where it said yes and no and now, along with some other psychological cards. So the story came up in my head about her, Lorraine, Raining. And then it came up and it was Leslie Ann, L.A., Alaya. And I used my cards. And I ended up, the cards had like 50 or something. And I pulled yes. And I pulled it like 6 times in a row. And then the last time was like the now card, like, okay, just do it. And even then I was like, oh, all right. So I need more confirmation to go by this new name, Alaya. And so I, maybe the next night, I went with a girlfriend to a restaurant that you go in, it's like a trays, and then you go sit down, but other people can sit with you. It's not like you sit alone. So my girlfriend and I were sitting down. This woman, a very tall woman, came to sit with us. She immediately started talking. She was a nurse, and she was in Sedona for a medical conference. And she immediately started talking about her daughter, who was pregnant. And she had come from the local bookstore there called the Vortex. And she said, I was just looking at this book. And it was Names of Angels. She said, I have picked out a name that I am going to tell my daughter about because I just love this name. Guess what the name was?
Alaya.
Guess what her name was? The woman.
Raining.
Leslie. It was Leslie.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah. I was like, oh, okay.
Isn't that funny? Isn't that funny when you ask for confirmation over and over again, and finally, like, the most obvious confirmation comes, and it's like, oh, geez, okay, I got it.
Right. I surrender. So, but anyway, from there, I played around with the name of it, the spelling of it, and so I moved to Durango, Colorado. I met my future husband there. Was traveling through, met him, moved there. And eventually, and I was still kind of going through these other different things, but I had started watching Gangaji. I had not seen Neelam again, right? So there was a period of time where I had not seen her. And but I was still cooking, and I was still moving through some wild things. And basically what I was learning was that, say, if I didn't have rent or something, I was like, all right, if I'm supposed to stay here, I'll find the rent. And I would literally go out, and I would just, I remember one time I picked up the phone, and it was for my roommate, and the roommate was gone. It was for an audition. I was like, can I do it, the audition? Yes, it was for a commercial. And I get the audition, and I pay the rent. So I was just really I lived in if I needed to take a shower, if I need to shower, then I'll walk to the shower. And if I come across the money, then I will be taking a shower, and I would find money on the floor and I would take a shower. So I was going through this period of like deeply trusting the moment and deeply, and just surrendering to what the time I was thinking it was the universe taking care of me. So I ended up in Durango, but then shortly after moved to Sedona. All this time, there was a whole deepening of that trust of just like really living in the moment. And when I moved to Boulder, that's when I started being able to see Neelam again, and she was traveling there quite a bit. And there still was this occurring of her higher, lower, and a lot of frustration about it, but then just this like heart opening. And I became pregnant with my first child. My husband and I got married during that time. And I'd say the next big thing shift for me was at the birth of my child. And so the birth of my child, we tried for the home birth and the water tub and and so, but it didn't go as planned. I didn't really, during the process, I wasn't attached enough to make a plan. There were women that were really making their plans, right? And really, I was like, I'm not going to make a plan, because I could tell that would cause a lot of suffering. Just like I moved through the create your own reality stuff. I was like, if you create your own reality, somewhere you're going to create something that you don't want to create. And then who are you going to blame? You'll be blaming how problematic is that? So in the birth, it was very powerful because I had back labor, and it was my husband, my mother-in-law, all were pushing my back in the contractions. And what I found in the birth was, if I moved away from the contraction, I suffered. And if I remained here, I didn't suffer. I may have used the word pain, but I found that I didn't really even need to call it pain anymore, that it was just the energy of what's here. And, we kept going because my water didn't break. So we drove in the Volvo. We kept working on it in the car. We got into the hospital. They were very lovely. They broke my water. They let me keep working on it until and then we ended up having a C-section. But it was such a powerful and obvious right here in this acuteness that if I moved from it, there was suffering. And if it was open to, then it wasn't suffering. And I had my beautiful daughter, Lily Mae. And right after that, I had another visit with Neelam. And that one was a specific one where a woman who was asking Neelam, why are you up there teaching? Sort of in a little bit of a sarcastic way, like, why do you get to be there? And Neelam started sharing her story about Papa G. And she was talking, the transmission was so alive, and the love. And when she spoke about Papa G, there was a tear that was coming out of her eye. And I was right there watching her. And when the tear came down, I was in the tear. And by the time like the tear went down her face, every bit of my resistance from her fell away. All the higher, the lower, that she had something that I didn't. And then in the tear, I recognized that the love was not just from her, and it wasn't just from Papa G, and it wasn't just Ramana Maharshi, and then that fell away, and it's the Buddha and Jesus, and then all of it fell away, that it did not contain any, it was prior, and then prior and prior. And then by the end of that satsang, I was basically crawling to her feet. And I felt like I just wanted to live there forever. Like, just give me bamboo paste, sort of what was happening. In my those, and I don't even know a bamboo paste, but that's what was coming up for me. So I think like I must have been a devotee, I was like, I think I'm done. I don't think there's anything else, that I'm here, right? And I'm her feet, and I'll just be here. But then it all whooshed back in. Like, I just got married. I just had a small child, and we already were literally within a week or two, we were moving here to Asheville. So when all this, I knew that I could hear inside, I wasn't supposed to stay with her. Like, if I stayed with her, that it wasn't it wasn't for this lifetime. That I'm to do something else. I could feel it. So it was, with that, I moved to Asheville. And most of the people that met me pretty immediately were inviting Neelam to come, because I couldn't stop talking about her, right? And then I think it was just so my friends Shelley and Julia here, who ultimately brought Adia here too, but also brought teachers like Ganga Ji and Byron Katie. So they brought her here a couple of times, and she ended up having some physical issues that kept her from traveling. So there was a very challenging time for me, because my teacher was unavailable. She was so unavailable that she couldn't be on a computer or near a phone. So any connection would be through letters, or maybe one of her volunteers would call and check on me. But that time was very important, because what I found was, in my life, I was really finding what was left in my life that was still conditioned, that was arising. I was finding it in my relationship with my husband. I was finding it in my thoughts and challenges with my young daughter. And so, and along this time too, folks were asking me to start teaching. And I was not comfortable with that. I think, even with Neelam, it just was not, I didn't feel cooked. And so really this took from my daughter being 5 months up until meeting Adia, which was probably 2010. So she was born in 2001, so it was like 9 years there. But I feel like that 9 years is really where most of my teaching really comes from, and like how I speak is really like all of the opening to the absolute, but then the going into embodiment and into life, putting on the work, the boots, and like opening up to all of it. And so there were this facet of the diamond, or this particular way of speaking. It's like of this apparent being is from a lot of that work that happened without having my teacher, and really finding teacher within, if that makes sense, right? So
That makes a lot of, I mean, it makes a lot of fucking sense. Excuse me. But yeah, I mean, this just very profound. I'm really enjoying. So don't, let me have that reaction, but please, I don't know if that's the end of the story.
No, I can keep talking. So yeah, I'll get a little more, just a little more.
Please.
So, so some of the challenges that I would say is there was a point in time where I recognized I was in a desert, right? So you have, we all had the stomach flu, nobody can get out of bed. I would have these times where I would be able to start seeing my emotions where they would be passing in front of me, and that they would come and go, and I would not have the aliveness of, say in meditate, not that I'm I do meditate, but it's not a traditional meditation. And I'll talk about that later too, because I didn't ever follow a path like Neelam or Adya. Whenever I would kind of feel into those things, I would hear, not for you, not for you. You pick it up, you're going to have to drop it. So my path was a path of life and of finding what I resisted in the moment, right? So there was this recognition that I was not allowing the moment fully here. I wasn't allowing what was happening, and I was still watching it. And it was creating separation. And I could feel that it was a desert quality, because I knew that aliveness was supposed to be there, but I wasn't, even though I could open up when words weren't happening or in satsang, and there could be all of this connection with people. But when I moved into the world and my kids said, I hated you, or like these other things, there would not be the availability there, right? And so I became very voracious. What I ended up seeing was like the guys who have the bowls with the red things, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I started going, okay, I had two visions. There was that one, it was like, all right, come for me. And the other one was, instead of having it all go around me or me watching it, I knew it had to come in. Like I just imagined my mouth opening and and that everything had to fully come in, and that was the only way to end. And it was in all of the moments of my life and all of the challenges of my life, all the cute and all the subtle, that everything that I resisted, that there's no way to watch anymore. There was no way. And when that also is the negotiator, right? The navigator. And so there was the shift of just really opening. And pretty quickly after that, Julia started inviting Adya to come. And this was before he was doing the big retreats here in Asheville. He came and did like a weekend. The first time he came, I didn't even go see him. Yeah. And then the second, but between that and the next time, I watched a couple videos of him, and I told Julia that I was really interested in him. And so she arranged for him to stay here at the next time with me and with my family here at my home. And so I remember going to pick him up at the airport, and he was picking up his suitcase. When I came up behind him, it was just the back of his head, and he was looking for his luggage, and it was just the back of his head. There was a transmission that almost knocked me off my feet. My eyes got as big as saucers, right? And so And then we just proceeded to get in the car. And he was with Terry Gray, who was at that time his right arm travel gal. And they came to my house. And I knew that moment when I got hit, I was like, oh, every whatever's left is done for. Yeah.
Sorry, I felt that deeply.
Yeah. I was like, whatever's left is done for. And I didn't know when, why, or how, but I knew it was coming for me, and I didn't really need to do anything. Mm-hmm. So he proceeded to stay at my house, and we had a lot of fun. We actually were quite silly together. And I went to see him speak that first day, and then afterwards we went to have dinner together, and it was a group of us, but he and I went ahead, and I told him that folks and people were continuing to ask me to talk. People had been coming to my house for years, like just wanting to talk with me. But I was just very reluctant. I didn't feel ready or cooked. But it really came from this, I didn't want to hurt anyone. I felt it was a very serious business I was reluctant. And so he told me, he said, if people are asking you to talk. Mm. And when he did that, there was like something that shifted in me. And I said, okay. And so I started I didn't have big meetings or anything, but I started being fine with people coming over, and then immediately was able to start discerning and feeling the energy of what was left. So really the beginning of my teaching, and then also before before Adia and I parted, he asked me, he said for us to start talking. And I was like, well, if I have a no, I'll call you. And he said, why don't you just call me? I was like, okay. So as I began to start talking to people and then doing more of groups, and this was a group of everybody organizing it and putting it together. There was never I respond. I'm a person. I respond. I don't seem to initiate. It doesn't seem like so. It was, but he was there for me to talk through all of the beginnings of teaching, because really that last bit falling away too, and really like calling him and saying how that went down, he was just there to support the whole thing. And that part there, I was in a Pilates class. So we'll end on this one. I was in a Pilates class, and I could feel like when I'm sitting on the mat, this energy coming up, looking at the other person that's maybe doing a little faster than me, or maybe the plank a little bit longer than me. And it wasn't like going to separation or pointing or anything, but it was like a little bit of self-judgment. And after the class, I went into a room. I felt really drawn to just be with that, because it was for me, it had become so poisonous. That little thing had become it was so big, it was so loud, it was so uncomfortable. So I went and sat down with it, and it was just a tremendous amount of energy that started coming in my body. And after a while, I had this happen before, so I was familiar with it. Before, it would be like everything would fall away, but I would, some feeling of separation would come back. If not then, it would come something that felt like a veil coming over. But this time it was, what I saw was a door. And I saw the door with a lock and it turning and then the key being thrown away. But the visual I was getting was that this is it, that it's not gonna, the separate self in that way is not going to resurrect. And when I opened my eyes, there was a very strange experience happening, because it was like my brain was lagging behind, but my body was just moving. So I was like watching my body just moving, like getting up and going. And I was just sort of like, well, this is interesting. I wonder where I'm going. I'm opening the door. Oh, look, I'm going to the car. How interesting. I wonder, when I got in the car, I was like, I wonder where I'm going. Like my brain was really clueless. I'm driving, and I went to like one of my favorite grocery stores, Green Sage, and I just watched myself get out of the car and go and get some lunch and put food on. And I really had no idea what I was putting on my plates, and everything I was just, wow, that's a great looking plate. And then I go up to the register, and this thing happens when I go to get my change. I'm watching myself, because I'm watching, right? This is the key. I'm watching my hands. I'm watching myself pull out the money. And then when that happens, that collapses. And then I was no longer watching my hand. I was just getting the money out. So the watcher left. So it was just one. And then that has remained, just this, without division, without observer.
Holy shit, man. What a recollection of an incredibly, I don't know, detailed or it's like a storybook recollection of the awakening process at, every step. And I there was like 18 different times where I wanted to stop you, but it didn't feel right to stop you. So I didn't, to ask a question, of course. And it's almost like how you ended it with that last motif. And I'm not trying to belittle by calling it motif or identify, but like that process of feeling that observer, and then the observer going away. The first thing you started with was this sense of you prioritized connectedness over programming, over what was happening. Like you said, that was a very young age, but that stuck with me the whole time. And you're obviously a very good listener throughout your own life, because you heard, you listened, you rebutted, you challenged, but it seems like you maintained this sense of priority of connectedness over everything else that was happening around you. And it's almost like that is maybe the secret ingredient to the awakening process is prioritizing that connectedness. And what's interesting about that beautiful, beautiful recollection is that it made me feel like I lived your life with you over that time period. And there was so many synchronicities of that. But sorry, I'm also living in the moment of all this, because it was just really interesting. But there was so many moments where, I felt the same things of, the black sheep, and not fitting in. And it's interesting how prioritizing that connectedness sometimes or oftentimes feels like a rebellion from the programming, right?
Yeah.
So there's that stretching and that pulling of, well, I'm not trying to be rebellious here. I'm not trying to go against the programming, but there's something else that is drawing me outside of that programming. There's this, like you said, connectedness, and I feel overwhelmingly encouraged to bring that sense of it's okay to feel. Your counselor in high school. I feel we need those in our lives to show us it's okay. You're not crazy. What you're experiencing is very unique of your own. But man, just I don't know. I could go on and on and on now. But just thank you for everything. And Corinne, please speak. So I stop.
Okay, as I do have, like, there was a couple things that, of course, I'm so in the moment, but I have to, because I felt so connected to your entire story. I mean, so deeply. And there was one thing that stood out to me that I really wanted to go back to when you said, at that time, I thought it was the universe doing it. Like, that was your language at the time when you were trusting the universe with the money coming in the shower and everything. Because I have at times, of course, that's kind of the language, the universe. And I find that dropping away from me now. And so I'm wondering if you could explain now maybe what your language is with that, if there is something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, the language I would say is there's intimacy, but it's even closer. That's too much. And even intimacy falls away. And like when intimacy falls away, what is it that's left? Right? That's what's here. That's what, as it arises, that we seamlessly bow to, there's no we. It's just a natural, most ordinary, regular to, when we're not adding anything on top, that there's just this simplicity of what arises, and then what we speak, what we do, how we react, that it's so simple and so ordinary that we miss it, and we want to doll it up and we want to dress it up. But all of that really takes us a little bit away from what's alive, what's here.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Corinne, because there was a couple times where you mentioned when you were listening, when you were listening deeper and you were, really being in that space of what was coming up. And I wanted to ask you at that moment, because one of the questions that we've been, talking about on the podcast is, what's the mechanism of waking up? What is the thing that we're listening to, right? That's the, the ego quote. What is giving you that advice? What is giving you that guidance? And you just put that perfectly. We want to dial up that simplicity of, we want to call that a thing. We want to give that an identity instead of just allowing that process to be the process, right?
And as soon as you do that, you're observing.
Yes.
Right? You're having, and it could be so subtle. Mm-hmm. But even that little veil is still, you're separate.
Yeah.
Right. It can be falling away, and then it may be like you have to make this go away as soon as we do it, because it's just for the brain, right? But if you have absolute and you have separation, and then you're meeting all that's in between, right? Right? Then it's no longer separate, right? Then, right. So this is all the apparent work that we do, right? And this being the ground of our being is, I like to use the word grace, but it's gravity, right? So as long as you aren't pushing away, that it's a natural, the energy is there to lean in, right? To just lean in. When we resist, our gravity of our being will never do anything about it. But it's everything. It's everything that's below you, everything that's above you, everything that's around you, everything that's inside of you, everything that's also, it's all that there is. So as soon as there's a crack, it goes right in. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes, a lot.
There's a lot of cracks.
And then the crack turns into like a river, and then it turns into the ocean, and then then you just have to let the ocean go, right? You have to let it all go. You don't get to keep any of it. And keeping any of it's just trouble, is what Neelam would say. Whole bunch of trouble.
Oh my gosh! I mean,
you don't get to keep any of it. So
not even a crumb.
Not even a crumb.
Nothing.
And that goes back to what you said, whatever that came out to you from your whole life, whatever you pick up, you have to drop. I mean, that's just really, that's it. Whatever you pick up, you have to, it's
now, whatever, like I also recognize whatever I was learning along the way, it becomes at service to grace. So the mind, when it's not in separation, it lines up very quickly to it's being like it's the king or the queen of the ego state, right? But as soon as we open to what is, and we're no longer projecting out, and we're no longer resisting, it lines right up to grace, and then it's right action, right? It's true action. So, and it's not manipulated. So it just arises and spoken, or the action, or the yes or the no. It's even if it's a no, it's a yes, right? Because does that make sense?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Sorry, when you said even when it's a no, it's a yes, because you're aligned. You're in that non-separateness.
Yes, and so the no's, I mean, and there's right anger. There's but it's not It's not crazy.
Yeah.
It's all right here. It's the unmoved mover, right? It's the unmoved, but it moves. This unmoved moves.
Yes, it's oddly that makes so much sense, and it's not even just an intellectual sense, it's a feeling sense. There's an alignment with what you're saying, and as you were saying that, we've talked about grace and gratitude and gravity, in a lot of these conversations. As you were saying that, this came up for me is that when you're in alignment with that, it seems like the symptom beingness of that alignment is gratitude. Not gratitude for anything, but being in gratitude of the grace that you're experiencing in that moment. What does that feel like to you?
That's just a natural expression of our being. It's like just naturally arises. When we're not resisting, we start moving from separation into oneness. And so gratitude is like part of, like something's being reflected back to you, but that reflection is there, that there's, it's the separation is falling away, right? Because there's so much appreciation, right, for whatever it's just this, it's love, it's connection. It's just like one of our natural expressions when we're in separation, we're looking at, and then when we start feeling compassion and gratitude, all of a sudden what you're feeling something and that person over there is feeling something, but it's not separate. It's the same, right? And so we're getting off of we're coming out of the wormhole, right? And so we're starting to feel the oneness when we're moving into gratitude and compassion and, what is that? If you were to feel into gratitude, what's inside of that?
Nothing more. I mean, I don't know. It's
check it out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's nothing more that can be explained, right? Nothing more that can be identifiable. It's a gratitude is the word, but it's a washing over. It's a cleansing. It's a sense of being showered in that humbleness of even being able to experience that which you are experiencing in that moment. And it's like
it's just the open. It's like everything opens.
Yeah.
Just simply, everything just opens.
And it's a rush, man. And it's like, it's this unending blessing. And then it kind of flips over and happens again and it happens again. But it's just kind of almost like, it's almost like when you have two gravities that just start spinning in sync, and it just creates this orb of this tingling, washing over, everything is simple and everything's okay kind of experience, but on the most profound level, I guess. That's the feeling. And then that's, like you said, what we have to do immediately is stop this immediately. But then the separateness is like, what do you call this and how do you tell somebody about it? You know, and it's like,
or how do you keep it? How do you keep feeling like this, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing
I remember that I remember like, and I would like to say that my experience of that has changed, it changes too, because when I first started teaching, I remember, and I still feel this, it still comes, but I would just be like, I would want to just go, I would be sitting there, but I would rather just like be at everybody's feet. You know what I mean? I would rather just go crawl over to everybody's chair, or the flowers, I would rather go over and just give every flower to them. And then, but the energy of it was more like, I'm bowing, but how can I get more deeply than where I'm bowing now? Because that's the energy to how much more deeply can I bow to this? How much more it's service? How it just, right?
Yeah.
As you were talking, I had a visual of, because I've been in this, that when you're learning how to swim, and you know the instructor tells you, you know, you can float on your back. Humans will float on their back if you just surrender and let go and just breathe. You have enough, you know, you will float on the top. But that first time, and I don't know why or how this is coming, like as if I remember this. It's not a memory, but it's this feeling of, I don't know, the last, you know, maybe 6 months to a year of my life, it feels like a stretching out of that moment where you're, for the first time, leaning back and trusting that you're going to float in the water. You know, that apprehension, you have full trust in it, but you haven't experienced, or you haven't been in that full trust. And so I've been in that state of like just releasing back into the waters of that what we're talking about right now, and feeling like there's nothing to trust, because there's no need for trust even. Like that's how deep that kind of goes. But that's the feeling I'm having. And as you were explaining your story, how you got to where you are now, but it all basically, it still is wrapped up and embodied in what you are, what you're doing, and the beingness of right now. But it's also fallen away so many times. It feels like I've finally settled back, you know, or I'm just finally settling back into that, trusting that I'm going to float in the eternal waters of life and experience, you know?
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Well, Alaya, we could obviously go on, and I hope you'll come back, because wow, I mean, it's been, I can't even describe it. Thank you so much.
You are my very self. Your suffering is my suffering. Your awakening is my awakening. I know who you are. I am at your feet. My beloved.
Until we meet again.
Until we meet again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello. Welcome to Say More section with Alaya. That was unusually and unexpectedly profound in a way that might just be like unique to my experience. But then I saw you kind of experiencing similar to what I was experiencing, which was just this shut up and listen. And you know, that was a somewhat of a unique interview in that you know, she almost had the interview for us because she basically laid out almost as if she knew all the questions we would have asked about certain periods of her life and, you know, the turning points. And she just beautifully recollected. And it was weird because it was oddly non-subjective. Like she was just pulling the memories from this ether, not from a identifier necessarily. You know what I mean? Like there was a free and just matter of factness to the recollection. It was just very interesting to me while she was. What was your experience while she was recollecting some of those turning points?
I just found myself in the story so many times. Like I was just so there with her fully. Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the language I would use is that it's just authentic. Like,
yeah,
she's fully authentically awake. And so it's like her getting that, you know, blast from Adia by seeing the back of his head. I feel like that's what I was getting, or we were getting as we were listening to her story. You know, I mean, when she described the teardrop on Neelam, you know, I mean, that's when I started to well up. And I was just so grateful for her to recount it in such a detailed way, because I could find myself in the story and I feel like pieces of my story that I've been confused about or not totally clear about. It's helped me to clarify a few things. You know, there was one specifically was towards the end when she said about the collapsing, because she started to describe when she got up off that last piece. Where did she say she was when she felt like her brain was separate and she was just observing her body?
After the collapse.
Yeah. Right. When she went in and that piece of noticing the ego that was comparing to the next person. And then she was watching herself. And I didn't want to bring it up during our conversation because I just wanted to soak up more of her. But I wanted to share with you, I think you've heard me talk about that a lot before, was like when I'm walking down the stairs, it's like, who's walking down the stairs? It's like I can see my body's walking down the stairs and I can see myself eating and buying groceries and doing things, but I'm not doing anything. Like there's this observer happening. Now that collapses, that's been going on for me. Actually probably since my first audio retreat, like 8 or 9 years ago. That happens. It happens a lot on the retreat. And then when I get back, it'll kind of happen and then not happen. And instead of it looking at it like I was looking at it as maybe I wasn't as awake, even though that doesn't make any sense. But when it wasn't happening, her looking at like it was collapsing and becoming one, that was like, whew, for me, because find myself looking for that experience instead of just accepting even, you know. So anyways, there's things like that I got clarity with, you know, and that the neti, which, you know, I was wanting to ask her to clarify, but she clarified it. Basically, neti is like a Sanskrit saying, and it means not this, not that, which she explained. Yeah. And so I love that where her beingness would just be, no, not this, not that. And then that clarity of whatever you pick up, you have to drop. So for people that don't understand what that means, for me, and maybe it'll mean something different for you, but for me is like, if you pick up a certain meditation technique, you're going to have to drop it. If you think that that's getting you anywhere, if you pick up a philosophy, you're going to have to drop it. If you pick up, you know, an attachment to anything, you're going to because awareness doesn't come and go. You know, anything that comes and goes is not it. Mm-hmm. You know, so love and gratitude are like, I feel that's like always there, and that doesn't come and go. I mean, the experience of it might come and go, but it's there all the time.
Yeah. Yes. And I think yes, all of that. But I think the most profound, when like what you just said was, you're looking for that experience. You're looking for that absolute. And what I noticed her being was basically she would pause, and I think she said this at the very end, where she said, as we're talking about the separateness and the identity, and like when we want to call it something, and she said, as soon as this starts to happen, we need to stop it immediately. And I feel like I was watching her do that throughout the whole interview, throughout her whole conversation.
Story. Yeah.
Story of there seemed to be moments where that separateness would almost create a veil, and then she would pause. And she would make sure, or she would allow that absolute to flow through her, instead of get caught up in that separateness that wanted to creep in. And I think that's where the true mastery lies. And that resonated in that story with her teacher, where somebody asked her, why are you up there? Why are you the teacher? Why are you the one that gets to sit up there and teach? And if it was a lesser of a teacher, bear with me on that, that term. If it was a lesser of a teacher, that teacher would say, well, I've studied with this and I've studied with that, and I have the most experience. But that's not what happened. The teacher spoke from that space before gratitude, before love, before all of that, before any of the past ascended masters, and that tear that came through. It's not like the teacher just says, "Oh, I'm going to go teach now." That gravity puts you in that space, right? The gravity of the absolute puts you in that space, and the letting go seems to be continuing the letting go. It's not just a one-time, oh, I let go, now I'm good to go. It's, you have to surrender always. You always invite that surrender. You always invite that letting go. You always invite that, and take this too. And, for somebody who can induce such an experience as we just experienced, the paradox is that at the very end, she says, "I'm at your service." and I want to be like, no, what I want to be at your service, and that's, again, that's fighting that experience of, not even fighting, but not allowing that separateness to take the center stage, and allowing the absolute to take center stage, and prioritizing that connectedness. That might be my new mantra, because like, prioritize connectedness. When you do that, you will not be looking for an outcome, because the connectedness just overcomes you. It takes you over, and it eradicates all of that, all of the other stuff, and and she said that knowingness when she saw the back of Adyashanti's head was, oh, I'm done for. It's basically like, anything that was left cannot compete with whatever that force was. And I think that force is that gravity of absolute. That's what I felt in that whole time, was just this, that's going to cut straight through you. It's just going to muddle you, because nothing can stand in its way. Nothing ultimately is eternal enough to combat that space. And I think we invite that always.
Well, I might disagree with you there. Maybe it's just I'm actually going to walk and talk because I got to plug my computer in. But or maybe I just misunderstood you. But so I feel like the ego. In ultimate terms, of course, yes, that does trump everything, as we've talked about before. Awareness trumps everything. However, the ego is so tricky, it will overshadow it all the time.
Yes.
So I guess that's where I was like, you're like, oh, it's there, but it's like the ego is so like, and is that what she was talking about at the end? I thought it was, but I wasn't sure. The crack that happens is the crack of the ego, the mind, the duality, that will find a space and weasel its way. It'll come in the back door. It'll come in and it's very, very tricky. I've been talking about with my friends, with Eddie and Anne Marie this week. It's like, it's so tricky. You think just when you think you're in it. And that's what I love about you explaining that she would take a breath and come from that flowing state, not from the ego, not from the head, just from that, okay, what's spontaneously coming, not what wants to come or thinks it should come. Does that make?
Yeah. Well, and I think, and maybe what I'm trying to convey and what is actually like I'm experiencing right now, it kind of resonates with if it isn't eternal, it isn't real. And that's the visual that I'm seeing right now is connectedness, that eternal gravity, that eternal space, that love, that unconditional state of being is and forever will be. So it's funny that there's this notion of anything within our being that tries to overshadow that. You know what I mean? We seem silly. We all seem like silly little beings or humans or whatever, trying to cloak the light of the sun. And we're constantly failing. And I think what was beautiful about her visual with the crack is like, well, then it turns into a river and then it turns into ocean. And then you have to let that be a bit. Then it was the absolute being from that, being in that space of absolute doesn't try to do anything because it doesn't need to do anything. And that's when you prioritize connectedness, you're remaining in that connectedness, and then the flow state happens. But when those cracks and that ego crack, the trick of the ego really is, oh, there's a crack, I got to seal it up. Mm-hmm. Well, who's going to seal it up? Mm-hmm. Well, I have to do something about this crack, and that's the visual that I saw was this. Oh, there's a crack. Oh, okay, there's a river. Okay, there's an ocean. Okay, now there's a crack. Okay, now there's a river. Now there's an ocean. It was just letting that space be is okay too. You know what I mean? That the ego being as it is okay too. When it overshadows, that's okay too. It's okay because the flow state, the connected state, doesn't require anything at all. So we need not worry. We all we need to do is nothing. I mean, not really, but I mean, prioritize the connectedness. I mean, that thing stuck out to me immediately, and it's all fucking good. I mean, that's my takeaway is it's all fucking good. Even when it's a no, it's a yes when you're operating from that flow state. And I mean, again, this is going to be one of those conversations that really, really penetrates deeply into that. And it's interesting. Maybe this is the first time I've had an experience like this where I'm not worried about it going away as well. That's interesting in and of itself.
Where's it going to go?
Exactly.
It's like, where's it going to go?
Well, I mean, and that's the blessing, right? I mean, that's the grace. That's the, I mean, that's just the knowing that kind of takes care of it all, because there's nowhere to come back to. There's nothing to escape. There's nothing to fix. There's nowhere to try to get back to. Mm-hmm. There is this, and then there's that. And then there's this, and then there's that.
I hope people aren't just tuning in now, because it would be a pretty silly conversation.
Those motherfuckers take mushrooms again and then start talking on the internet.
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. I feel giddy with excitement, but also giddy with calmness, but also giddiness with I just feel. I mean, I don't know. That's not much more to say.
Dropping my cord. You just feel.
I just feel. That's it. Nothing. I just feel. I feel airy. I feel light, but I also feel like I can't breathe. But I also feel like I'm breathing more. I don't know. Feel pretty fucking high right now. I mean, if you get through that interview and you need me to say anything more, I mean, what the fuck? It's like, Jesus Christ, just go be with that, go and then listen again and then go be with it. That's what it feels like.
That's good. And that's how you start. Before we got on, you were like, I don't have anything more to say. I hope you do. But but yeah, it was a great interview. And I feel very blessed to have connected with her. Colleen did say, I can't wait till she slays Sean. Specifically, she said that. But I must say, she slayed me. She did slay me as well.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very slayed. I mean, I do and I don't. I think I resonate a lot with what you were saying about being in so many aspects of her story, being in so many aspects of that. There were so many affirmations and synchronicities, and it was almost like a parallel life. The landscape and the circumstances were different, but the times of deep contemplation, the time of listening, the time of realizations, there are so many of those that I can recall. But there was such a resonance with it, not from but almost from like a thank God somebody else had something similar, because like I said in the interview towards the end, it feels like a rebellion that you constantly have to fight to stay in that. You have to learn to accept that you're seeing something that doesn't seem right. You have to struggle through that, and I think that's why it's so different for everybody, and it's so important to when people are in that seeking experience, really accept and have forgiveness with your version of that process. This was a case where there was a lot of resonance, but there's a lot of times where it's not the same. There's a completely different way that this path unfolds, and I think it's really good wisdom when you say, when you feel attached to even a meditation practice, when you feel attached to that as if that meditation practice is going to get you to that place that doesn't actually exist, you have to let it go. Mm-hmm. that's huge wisdom, and I think that's where there's a lot of pitfalls in religion, and I think that's my that has been my biggest hang up. I'm thankful that hang up is dissipating, but a big hang up for me has been that there's a lot of religions that point to this is the only way to get there. Well, the two things that are wrong with that is there is no there, and there is no one way, and I think that,
and there is only one,
and there is only oneness, and that's what's so fucking hilarious about Christianity to me is like the person that you use as your barometer for how to be in life, I really believe resonated in that oneness, in that connectedness, in that flow state. It wasn't his flow state. It wasn't his teachings. It was the wisdom that was coming up through him. And I think that's why when you look back on the very small collection of instances where he's living in that flow state, he's being in that flow state, he is at your feet, just like Alaya was, right? How can I be more at your service? And that's the sign of a guru in that state. The one who's pointing at the light is that person who's looking to be even more deeper at your service. That's fucking Jesus Christ, people. Like, that's it. The fact that we're fighting about the fact that we're even arguing as to who serves or divulges that experience more purely is such a joke. It is so small to me because it really is the exact opposite of the state that Christ was being in,
But it's small to you because of where you're coming from and your understanding. It's not small to the people that follow, that have that. The way they feel is absolutely valid to their experience. Absolutely valid to their experience.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah.
And that's, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to say we have to wrap up because we have to do the intro.
Yes. So that, and that is that separateness creeping in right there in that moment. And it's all good. Either way.
It's all good either way.
All good either way. That's a good place to end. We'll
all
end
right,
there.
Honey. I love you.
Love you too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.